happens because we are so disconnected from ourselves and disconnected from each other. And it's a real struggle. We have to work to create connections in our lives. And we think that it should just be here. And that could be because we're biologically built to have connections. But the reality is that it takes work to build these connections quite often.
Welcome to the podcast The Embodiment Talks, a podcast by the Embodiment Lab with Marion van Opijnen. Taking your role as change agent of societal or education systems requires vision and courage. This podcast will help you take this pioneer's role with more body awareness and confidence, without losing sight of the connection with others. We dive into how we as humans are hardwired, how systems change works, and how both are related. I will take you on my own quest, and I will share background information, talk to experts, and share exercises. We will think, feel, and act. Great that you're here, and happy listening. Here we are today. I think we already set this appointment several weeks ago, and so I'm glad that we made it. You are in Vancouver, and I'm in the Netherlands. Today I'm talking with Prema McKeever, and we haven't really met in person, which is interesting.
No, we haven't. Yes, no we haven't.
But you're a teacher at a program where I was a mentor, the online Biodynamic Breathwork and trauma release training for online practitioners. And of course, for my own training, I've watched your videos, and I think one of the reasons why I asked you for this interview as well is because you're so profound in explaining how things work in our body and in our nervous system, and I think that's very interesting for the listeners of the Embodiment Talks.
And I'm hoping what I have to say can be of use to people.
I don't have a doubt. Yeah. But and I also find it very interesting how you combine the Eastern wisdom and the more scientific knowledge that we have as well, and how they come together in your work. And I think that's very interesting as well, how you succeed in that, and valuing both in the work that you do with your clients, because you have a practice, a one-on-one practice, and you do group work, isn't it?
Yeah, both. I'm a trauma therapist here in Vancouver, have a private practice, and then I lead many different types of groups around the world. Path of Love, which is a transformational process, biodynamic breathwork and trauma release, online groups, weekend groups, all sorts of. I love group work. I think group work is particularly important for embodiment and for healing. So it's really a huge passion of mine.
And why is it group work in particular that you mentioned that? So,
well, most of us, the traumas that we carry in our body were inflicted upon us by other people. And oftentimes they were inflicted upon us by people who were meant to take care of us, who were supposed to be our sources of safety, people we had some sort of connection or relationship to quite often. One of the big tragedies of life is when we're hurt by those that we should feel safe with. And what tends to happen from that is our nervous system starts to get patterned in such a way that people are no longer safe. Connecting is no longer safe. Being open and vulnerable with other people is no longer safe. And so by coming together in groups and doing our healing work in groups, we get to repattern our nervous system so it can start to, again, trust that being with other people, that people can be safe. We start to learn discernment. Yes, it wasn't safe back then with this person or that person or in this situation, but we then have the opportunity, because our nervous system is ever changing and growing and developing and learning. That's the whole basis of neuroplasticity. So with group work, we come back into a community of people, into an environment of safety, and that starts to shift our nervous system, and it can do it so much faster than one-on-one individual therapy can do.
Okay, because what you actually say is that you have the experience in the group, which is healing in itself, as
Yes.
being in a group that is safe and that probably listens to you and can nourish you as well.
Yeah, that's part of it. But there's also, when you do group work, invariably in that process, you also get to learn about other people's hurts and other people's traumas. And so that takes away some of the layers of shame, where you start to realize, okay, it wasn't just me. It's not that I did something wrong in the past. We actually start to learn and see how so many others have suffered in the way that we have suffered. And that in and of itself is the basis for developing compassion for other people, and ultimately compassion for ourselves. Part of the root of compassion is connecting to the suffering of others. And through that, we also start to lessen the shame. That trauma is so interlinked with shame. We start to, that grip of shame that wants to say, there's something wrong with you. What happened early in life, the trauma that happened to you is because there is something wrong with you. We start to then melt that grip and realize, no, there actually wasn't something wrong with me. I suffered like so many other people suffered. And it wasn't because there was something wrong with me. There was actually something wrong with the person who was meant to protect me, who was meant to be my caretaker, who was meant to hold me in a place of safety. They're the ones that something was wrong with.
Okay, and how, if you say like, okay, that happened in the past, you talk about development trauma.
Developmental trauma.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Or it can even be a trauma as an adult. Yeah. Sexual, obviously sexual assault happens as children as well as adults. I mean, there's so many situations that trauma, a big part of trauma, when it's interpersonal trauma, when the trauma happened because of another person. Does shame sometimes happen, say, with car accidents? Sure, we can blame ourselves for the car accident happened, but one of the big hallmarks of interpersonal trauma, when somebody else did something that violated our boundaries, a big part of that is also shame comes in.
And shame by the victim.
The feeling that I must have done something wrong.
Yeah. And therefore this happened to me.
Yes, that's a part of it. I mean, it can look in different ways. I either did something wrong and therefore this happened to me, or I should have been able to protect myself and I didn't. I should have been able to do this. I should have been able to do this. I should have been able to do this. I mean, there's all these ways that we start to put the blame for what happened onto us. And that's taking on this cloak of shame. In group work, when we come together and our nervous system starts to do what it does, which is called neuroception. Our nervous system is always below the level really of our conscious awareness. Our neuroception is always feeling into our outer environment as well as our inner environment, trying to sense, am I safe right now? What's happening inside my body? Does everything feel safe inside my body? Heart rate's not going too fast. Okay, that's good. Stomach is not hurting. Digestion seems to be moving through. Okay, no problems there. Neuroception is both the internal assessment of how's it going inside of here, as well as the external, what is happening in my environment? Not just, is there a car coming at me, but what is the quality of the relationships around me? What is the communication like? What is happening between the people around me? Is this safe? Is this feeling okay? Does it seem like anybody's a threat to anybody else or a threat to me? Is something about to happen? This is all neuroception. And our nervous system is tuned to be doing this constantly below the level of our conscious awareness. And so when we've experienced trauma in our life, when our nervous system is shaped or impacted or under the influence of traumatic stress or multiple traumatic events in life, it gets shaped then to, instead of being able to accurately assess often, is something safe or is something dangerous, our nervous system gets highly tuned to sensing any possible danger. And it may not recognize cues of safety. And it may be highly tuned to expecting and looking out for and imagining, not imagining is not quite the right word, but having a high expectation of danger and that things aren't safe. And therefore, I'm never safe. I can't be safe, particularly if I'm around other people, I'm not safe. Group work, in many ways, is an antidote to that. if it's done well, if it's held well. In group work, if there is safety and holding and connection and the right kind of support, and a chance to then process and be seen and see other people, be witnessed and witness other people, that starts the process of reshaping our nervous system and becoming more attuned to cues of safety, not just cues of danger. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I also tried to make the link with what we were talking about before we started recording this, to our societal systems. So we're living in certain systems. We're living in systems where we work, how we set up companies, a very individualistic society, at least in the Western world, and I could just imagine that neuroception, just my tentacles going out in the world and trying to sense whether it's safe or not. And I was wondering, like, okay, what would I then sense? How would that? Maybe you can say a little bit more on that as well. How those the way how we've set up that way, let's just stick to how we work, for example, in very hierarchical companies where you have to have targets that you have to strive for and all these kind of things, what the effect of that is on our nervous system. Because what you say is we all the time sensing that. So we're sensing something in that environment. So could you say something about that?
Yeah, I think it absolutely carries over into the work environment. What's the impact on our nervous system when we don't have this downtime, when there's always emails to be coming in or deadlines to meet or threats of a merger or threats of layoffs, excuse me. And like you just named, this hierarchical system too, where we're constantly, or depending on people's jobs, of course. I mean, some people might have more degrees of relative safety in their work than others. But overall, if we take this idea of a hierarchical system that is not designed for somebody's long-term safety, long-term sense of security, give them a sense of belonging and being part of a community and being a valued member of a team, but is rather maybe sending other messages of insecurity, demands. You can't really relax. You have to keep performing. There's new stresses, new goals, new levels to achieve. Yes, that is sending a signal to our nervous system that we really cannot just let ourselves rest and settle and know that we've landed or in a place where we are safe.
Yeah. And how could we better deal with that? How could we create a space that would feel safe?
I am not the expert on corporate work culture.
No, I know. But from a nervous system perspective, what would we need? What would our nervous system need in such an environment? Because this podcast, of course, is about societal change. So we've created a certain system of how we work. And from a nervous system perspective, what would work better? What kind of structure, or how could that look like?
Yeah. I cannot say definitively, but some of the ideas that I have would mean we would dismantle the capitalist culture, corporate culture, because when you have a system, an economic system that is based on maximizing profit and cutting costs, well, those cutting of costs impact our livelihood, downsizing, whatever, restructuring, all those things, they mean real people and real jobs. And that breeds insecurity. So what would we need? We would need a work culture that lets the employees know that they're highly valued, that they're part of a team, that we are here for the long run with you, that it is not about, we're not a company that's going to be restructuring or downsizing or merging or doing this, that actually the goal of our company is the not quite the word well-being. I think I'm looking more for the word of the goal of our company is the success of everybody who is involved, of everyone who works here. Yeah, it's not going to be about maximizing profits for shareholders or maximizing the company's bottom line, but more, how do we create an environment that meets as much of our needs as possible, and particularly our needs for security. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of his base needs is security. We need to know that we're going to have shelter and food. And after that, then we have, first there's needs for safety, and then there's needs for security, and then there's needs of belonging, stuff like that. So a work environment is a societal environment where these base core needs are recognized, talked about, acknowledged. And I would even say that a company would include its employees when setting some of its long-term goals, some of its action plans, some of its directions, where people feel like they have input, where people feel like what they have to say matters. All these sort of things would send the signal back to the nervous system that I belong and that I am a valued member of this community. So a company that built community.
Yeah, so you mentioned several things, which is a long-term commitment. So that it can't be like a reorganization next year and you're laid off, or we're gonna take over another company and it's just about growth. And you mentioned involvement as well, as both like a need to have that sense of belonging.
Yeah, and that your voice matters.
Yeah, that you're heard. Yeah,
that you're heard, and even if you are not one of the VPs or whatever it may be in a corporate structure, that somehow you still have input. There's some way that you have some element of control over your environment. Yeah.
And maybe this is more in your expertise, but what does it do in our nervous system when we have that sense of belonging?
Well, without going into a whole lecture on the polyvagal theory, it helps our nervous system be more in what's called the ventral vagal state, which is the state of social connection. We're able to feel relaxed, present, calm. We're able to sense our feelings in our body. We are in tune with ourselves, and we're able to be in connection with another person and feel safe. So that sense of belonging is what is needed to be in that what's known as the ventral vagal aspect of the parasympathetic nervous system in the polyvagal theory.
Yeah, and so when we don't have that sense of belonging, then and we don't get into the ventral vagal, we get in either in the dorsal vagal, which is the other branch,
or sympathetic.
We go into sympathetic.
Yeah, we go into sympathetic. We feel under threat. We feel stressed. We feel activated. We feel worried, anxious, fearful. That's all sympathetic.
Yeah. And how would you say you see that in our current society?
Oh, it's a little hard. I mean, society is made up of a lot of individual nervous systems. And so you're asking a nervous system question on something that doesn't really have a nervous system. And when we look at it, what's happening for people in society? Well, some people are doing really good. Some people are really having a very good past couple of years. They've been home, they've slowed down, they've got more connected to what's important to them. They've reorganized their lives. They've left jobs they didn't like. They've started new businesses, whatever it may be. Some people have been doing great these last couple of years. Other people have not been doing great, obviously. Economic hardship, loss of employment, relationships deteriorating. There's a whole gamut. I can't really say what happens in society, because individually, I mean, of all the thousands of people I've had contact with over these past couple of years in the groups that I lead and things like that, I would say, because I've been leading a lot of online groups, there's a whole gamut. Yeah.
And would you say that the people that did great are more resilient in that sense to, like, of course, we had kind of a shock wave going through over the planet with all the COVID and Corona. I assume that you are also referring to that as you talk about the last few years, which is now ongoing for 2 years, I think. But would that mean that some people are more resilient than other people to cope with these kind of disruptions?
Not necessarily, because resilience is what we draw on when our layers of support don't hold. So we all have layers of support. And so resilience is our ability to, in a way, to be able to bounce back from adversity, to be able to experience stress, to be able to appropriately respond to stress, find a solution, and then return back to a state where we can continue growing and thriving and moving on with our lives. So the people who are doing well, they also might not have had as much threat to their support system. Maybe they lived in a country where there was more economic support from the government. So people didn't have to be so fearful about making their rent or their mortgage. You know, I mean, maybe they were in a place where their jobs actually weren't threatened by the pandemic. Maybe they didn't have kids they had to school at home. You know, there's so many different variables that cause the stress over these last couple of years of getting through this pandemic. I don't think we can make these kind of broad generalizations because everyone had to face a unique factor, a unique combination of what were the stress factors impacting them. And then, yes, if you look at that, what layers of support did people have? Did some people have family nearby they could call on? Did they have community groups they could call on? Did they have a partner in life that supported them? Did they have financial savings which cushioned them? What kind of options did they have? What kind of job did they have? Did they have job flexibility or not? Could they work from home? Could they not? Did they have to go and be exposed possibly in the public and know every day they're running the risk of being exposed to COVID? I mean, there's so many different factors, and this pandemic really heightened, I think, the divide between people, particularly people who have economic resources and people who don't have economic resources. And then at the bottom, after the support has gone through, then we look at resiliency. Okay, and of the people that really struggled, you know, was and weren't able to successfully navigate, that were pushed further into poverty, what kind of support was there for them? You know, it's very different to be faced with this challenge when there is an outer societal support and when there isn't an outer societal support or family support. And then, yes, the other question is, what is the resiliency of our nervous system? And of course, our nervous system resiliency, one of the things that impacted is the experience of earlier stresses in our life. You know, did we have big stresses, particularly in the early parts of our life, and our nervous system was still developing? If so, that's going to impact our nervous system resiliency. It's going to tend to make it lower. It's going to tend to make it that when we're faced with a stressor, our system is not able to really respond. We don't have that kind of foundation or that base of healthy nervous system regulation that needs to come on board and from the holding environment in the first, 3, 5, 8 years of life. So there's a lot of different factors here we're looking at. Cultural, societal expectations, the family system, the individual household system, and then the nervous system level. So we're going all the way from this most micro level to this big macro level. So we can't make these broad, we can't just paint this broad paintbrush.
No, and they're all related.
They
mutually influence each other by how we live, how we work, how we do our things, and the pandemic as well. And
what's the gender role expectations? How does gender play into it? What's expected of a woman in this pandemic with children versus a man with children? How does that impact her performance at work? How does that impact the expectations at work? Who is supposed to take care of the children and the school and the homework and all this stuff? I mean, it is so multi-layered. Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And yet I still feel that support system, I'm kind of inquiring into my own question that I'm going to ask you, I think, but because if I look at, we just we just spoke about like, okay, what would be a healthier way of organizing a business? And of course, that could be at any level in society. We spoke about corporates, but that of course also comes to any system, that in the tech system, the economic system, the whatever. Yeah. And so what and if I would relate that to what you said about resilience, then in that change towards a healthier society or a healthier way of organizing ourselves, it's important to kind of keep those support systems safe and healthy for people, because that keeps people resilient to actually deal with the change.
Mm-hmm. Well, support is part of resiliency. Yeah, so there's the resiliency of our nervous system, which is how well can our nervous system manage and bounce back from stressful events? How much can our nervous system experience a stressor of fear, whatever it may be, and be able to respond appropriately without going into extreme dysregulation, which could look like a panic attack, an anxiety attack, or a shutdown, which would look something more like going into hopelessness, helplessness, extended periods of depression. Yeah. So there's nervous system resiliency. What is the capacity of an individual nervous system to respond to stress in their environment and be able to return to a more healthy functioning level, meaning they're able to meet the challenge and continue on their journey in life without being stuck in either this overwhelm, dysregulation, or in the shutdown freeze. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And absolutely support plays a role in that. Support, the outer like support, we have support from friends, from family, community, economics, job, support we have from having a meaning in our life, from feeling like what we're doing has some purpose, some meaning. All these are different layers of support from our spirituality, support from spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs, meditation. Any of those things help our nervous system be able to meet the challenges that are there and be able to overcome those obstacles.
Yeah, so what I hear you say is that support is like key in being able to come to change at any level in your personal lives, but also in our family lives, as in our work lives. If there's not that support, we will be not be that resilient to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who live pretty isolated lives, who try to manage and take care of everything themselves. And some people do find a way to make that work. But I would say for the most part, human beings are meant to be interdependent. We are biologically built to be in connection with each other. We're actually not, we tend to not do so well psychologically when we're alone. We also don't tend, you could look at our studies on the nervous system. Loneliness decreases the effectiveness of our immune system. Sorry, you can look at our immune system. Loneliness decreases the strength of our immune system. There's all so many physiological functions within our body that don't do well when we're in isolation. So support, meaning that we are meant to be interdependent. We're supposed to be, I believe, giving and receiving with each other on an ongoing daily basis. Mm-hmm. Whether that's with just a tight inner circle, couple of friends, couple of close family members, or whether that's within larger circles of community and connection.
Yes, I find it always interesting that we actually kind of lost that somewhere in a very individualistic society. I mean, we value individualism so much, and capitalism is very much based on our individual gains. And so somewhere in history, we lost it.
I think it shrunk. I think it shrunk from, say, a small tribe, into a more of an extended family, then from the extended family more into the nuclear family. And now the individualism is usually just like your partner and your kids. And then, you talk to your parents once or twice a month, whatever it may. I think it's been shrinking and shrinking. Yeah. And I think that is when we got disconnected from the land. We no longer were more farmers, hunters, gatherers. We started congregating more in cities. We were still more connected to extended family in some extent, and many cultures are. I mean, I don't want to give this idea that I don't want to ignore that many cultures in the world still do live within an extended family system. Many Asian cultures do, many African cultures do, many cultures in Central and South America do. So when we're talking about this individualist culture, we're really specifically naming most North American, outside of Mexico, and European. That's really what we're talking about here. But many other parts of the world, it's still not like that. I'm hoping it doesn't turn out like that. It may, though, because there's more and more forces. How big of a house can you really have? Can you really fit 3 different generations in your house? There's all these economic demands to live smaller and smaller and smaller. And then your focus then becomes more on the direct immediate family.
Yeah, and we commute more to work, so we can live at more bigger distance. So, I mean, for my example, I don't know about you, but like I live about an hour's drive, which in the Netherlands is probably much more than in Canada, but over an hour's drive to my parents. And I moved away from my parents when I was 18, so which is about 30 years ago now. And it's not very likely that, I would take them into my home when they go older. So, and we created structures for that, but actually those structures do something to our sense of belonging, because maybe our first primary sense of belonging goes to the family.
Yeah, I mean, I live a 3-hour. I haven't lived closer than a 3-hour airplane ride. Okay. My parents since I was in my mid-20s. Yes, and there is this idea that children are supposed to, in this Western culture, that children are supposed to go off into the world and leave the home. Now, of course, COVID is changing a lot of that. People can't afford to. More and more people in their 20s and 30s are returning to live with their parents, which is creating this whole other this new dynamic. And we'll see what happens. Hopefully, if we come out of this thing in the next couple of years. But yes, there is this idea then that we don't take care of the previous generations, and our focus is on us and our children if we have them. Yeah.
Yeah. And how is this potentially, it's kind of a big word, but traumatizing, that we kind of end up in much smaller communities than what our nervous system actually, how we would nourish our nervous system?
Well, again, I think it also depends on the type of community you end up with. Because let's say you don't have a great relationship with your parents. Not being in connection to them is actually going to be healthier for your nervous system. And having a community that you've created, a chosen community, it might be made up of friends, it might be a spiritual community, whatever it might be, organizations that are based around a cause, a purpose, something you care about, whether that's political or social, humane, whatever the issues are, all that can make up for it. So it's not necessarily traumatizing at all to be able to have the freedom to choose your community. Because also remember, previous generations, you didn't have a lot of choice about your community. You tended to be born somewhere, you tended to somewhat, except for in cases of migration, you lived in the general area, or there was a lot of pressure for you to live in the general area, to stay in that area, in that region. Of course, again, people migrated, they immigrated, they had to for economic reasons. My family, my grandparents came from Ireland because of economic reasons. My great-grandparents came from Italy, same thing. There was no money in the village, so they had to leave when they were teenagers by themselves. Things have not been great on a community level for several generations. We have been faced with this need to move away from community for our very survival. whether that was because there wasn't the land available, there wasn't the opportunities available, whatever it may be. So I think part of human resiliency is that when we do move away, we very naturally form new communities, hopefully. And part of the loneliness factor, I think, out there is when we struggle to form new communities. And that gets harder and harder, of course, as we age. But people still do find that joining, like I said, different organizations, groups, things like that. They start to slowly, it takes time to build community. And I think it's one of the important things is, I don't know if you ever read Johann Harley's book when he's looking at depression, but he really sees depression as an epidemic of loneliness in society.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely agree with that. This loneliness that happens because we are so disconnected from ourselves and disconnected from each other. And it's a real struggle. We have to work to create connections in our lives. And we think that it should just be here. And that could be because we're biologically built to have connections. But the reality is that it takes work to build these connections quite often.
And why is there such a large number of people that do not succeed with that? Which is a growing number of people as in the Western world. Of depression and loneliness. And so although we are hardwired to create those communities, and I like what you say, and like, okay, we kind of can choose our own communities nowadays, which we couldn't before. But apparently not so many, but many people do not succeed, and that's a growing number. So how come that it has become so difficult?
I think part of it is, where are we based? So we work 8-hour shifts. We go to work, we spend 8 hours there. The people we work with, we may or may not form connections with. Quite often, we might not even work with other people. We might be working in or in a small team. And the team might have people of many different ages, and maybe we have something in common with them, maybe we don't. Maybe they have children, and so as soon as work is done, they're out of there. There isn't that place for connection. Our locality is very disrupted, and our lifestyle. We go to the gym or we go to yoga, and we hope to meet somebody there, but we're all running around so crazy busy. And do we really stop and talk to the person next to us? Not very often. And so then we join maybe a book club, or we join something else. But it is this, I think it kind of goes back to what you're asking earlier about the individualism of Western culture. People are somewhat lives, and
Sorry, you were breaking for a moment.
Oh,
you said it was going back to the individualism in the question, and then you broke.
Oh, okay. So going back to the individualism that we were talking about a little bit earlier, we tend to be focused on our immediate families, our immediate social circles. And it gets harder and harder as we get older to let other people in or find those other connections. And oftentimes there just isn't the energy in our day. It takes work to go out and form these new relationships and form these new connections. And so it's much easier when you have that, of course, from growing up in a particular community with shared ideas and values, and each other. And then we're getting displaced from that, and we're moving to all these new places. And there's so many different reasons why we struggle to find connection in our lives, to find meaning in our lives. It's not even really talked about. It's not something that people think of. It's like more of making money and paying the rent and making ourselves feel secure and having that base. And it's quite sad. I mean, I think that's why we see such an epidemic around, like you said, depression, anxiety. Where do I belong? What's my purpose? What's my meaning? Why am I here? What am I supposed to do? We're having, I think, right now, a real crisis of who am I? What is my life really about? We no longer have the systems in place where we were born more or less into a role and into a set of expectations and into a community that held us in that position. And we moved through life, and we, got married, we had kids, the next generation, da 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 da. Now we have so many choices. I mean, I don't know if you have kids or not. I never had kids.
No, neither have I.
Yeah. And so here we are, most of the women that I know never had kids. And we are one of the first generations, I believe, of women in the Western world that has been faced with this many choices and this many options. What type of career do I want? Do I want to get married? Do I not want to get married? Do I want to have children? Do I not want to have children? I mean, we are navigating a whole new world, and we're really breaking ground with this. And it's a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's probably also breaking with expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Like in previous generations, you would have children.
Yeah.
There wouldn't even be a question, where now we have a choice. And of course, you still need to be lucky that it it happens. But we also perceive it as having a choice of having children or not. And I also think actually that the women that do have children also end up with many choices and maybe even have more responsibility, because they also have to raise kids, and how do you do that, and children care, and
undoubtedly. My
but
hat is off to all the women who have children.
But then they don't have to deal with the issue of breaking with a certain tradition. Whether it's a choice or it just happened, but any woman who doesn't have children broke with a certain tradition as well.
Yeah, certain roles and expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you said, which I thought was interesting, a little bit earlier when we spoke about that loneliness, and so many people with that experience loneliness and depressions. And at one point you say, you have to work to build relationships. And so it takes a kind of an effort. And in a very consumption-oriented society, where we go to a shop and we buy something and we earn enough to be able to buy that, life seems to be very makeable with little effort. So, and now I'm just philosophizing a little bit, but I can see there a link as well in like, okay, having to work for something, and maybe we've kind of unlearned that as well, that, it doesn't just come by itself, and we need to put effort in it. It's maybe the same with that. There's so many singles that we put so much we all want to find in a relationship, which you can wonder, can we find that all in one relationship? We're all looking for the sheep with the 5 legs, and it's the same with the people that we meet, and can we accept that not everybody is perfect in those relations, and that we may need several relations to meet all our desires and longings, and the ones that we can't fulfill ourselves.
I think there is this, I don't know if it goes back to disrupted attachment. We didn't get into attachment in this talk, and I don't think we will. But if you look at our first models of relationship, our early life experiences, those first 3 years of life, we're supposed to form a healthy attachment to our adult caretakers. And that healthy attachment to our caretakers then gives us a sense of security and safety to be able to go out into the world, experience our individuality, and form other healthy connections going forward. Well, many of us didn't have a healthy attachment, and that attachment got disrupted. And we tend to, instead of having healthy models of relationships, we tend to have more unhealthy models of relationships, models that are based around somebody will only be there some of the time for me, not consistently, or I'm always going to be left wanting, it's never going to be satisfying, or relationships feel overwhelming or dangerous, I need to keep my distance. There's all different ways that people form models of what they implicitly feel about relationships based on their early life. And then when we didn't have that healthy attachment with our caretakers, I believe we also take that then model out into the world, and we start looking for other people to try to attach to and kind of fix that hole within us. But we're adults. You know, a child is meant to really attach, you know, like really hold on and grip and not let go. But that's not a healthy adult relationship. But we don't carry within us that internal sense of that secure holding, that safe environment, that sense of I'm okayness within myself. And so therefore I go out into the world and I'm looking for other adult relationships to try and give me that. And that puts us into whole other cycles, whether that's friendships or intimate relationships, whatever it may be. It doesn't work. And so I think we also have a crisis as adults of how do we actually form connection to people, healthy connections. That's why I think it's great. Johan Hartley's book is called Lost Connections. How do we form these healthy connections instead of, and I think part of it comes back to, we have to do work around our early life trauma. We have to do work around finding what are those missing pieces within ourselves, so that it's a whole emotional, psychological, nervous system level of work. But that then supports us to have healthier connected relationships as adults.
Yeah, and that is the one-to-one relationships. But also, how can we build structures that are healthy if we don't know what we actually need, or if we can't really relate to others, but also to the structures that we create? Because if we haven't learned to connect, then how can we build something that nourishes that connection?
And I think people are trying. I mean, I think you look at the intentional communities that pop up all around the world. They're trying new models. How do we build this? And I suspect, I don't really know. I suspect, I'm hopeful, I should say, that over these next 10, 20 years, people are going to come out of COVID and really be looking at these questions. Okay, what type of community do I want to live in? You know, what this has brought home for people. What do I really value in life? What feels meaningful to me? How do I want to live? And we're seeing also with older adults that, you know, either don't have, who know their kids, they're not going to move into their kids' homes, who know that they don't have that option and don't want to move into a nursing home, a care home. They're starting to come together in communities and start to arrange for, okay, how can we build a community together that will meet our needs as we age without us having to go into this nursing home situation, you know, whatever it may be. So people, I think, are very creative and are saying, okay, the old systems don't work. What do I want to build, or what can I build moving forward? Now, it's a relatively small percentage of the population right now that's doing it. You need to have money to do something like that. You need to have certain resources. But hopefully that will continue to spread as time goes on and involve more and more of the population.
Yeah, which is interesting. I'm involved in a community and we're looking for a piece of land where we can build a community. But we also find that by doing that, it's not just about how do we relate and connect to each other, but how do we also, because you already said you need money to be able to do that, but how do we create homes or houses that are accessible for younger generations as well, so that if we age, we can have new people coming in and still afford the houses. So it's not just about the connections that we make together, but also about, well, how do we create ownership over the property? So there's so many questions, and that's why it's such a systematic approach to change, because there's so many questions that need to be answered to create those communities. But it starts with the intention of wanting to live in a different way, that kind of serves the different generations. And which is an interesting, and it's a way of healing maybe as well, where we spoke about we've lost kind of making those connections. So it's a way of healing that loss in those communities. And that we choose ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. The society at large does not provide for that right now, for the most part, for most people. And so then that's a real awakening into what can we do on a smaller scale that feels more in tune to who we are as people and how we want to live. I think it's so inspiring to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me as well. And I'm really curious where we are going to end up as a community.
Yes.
As property in the Netherlands is very scarce, but yeah. But I think that also it's nice to talk about, because then it's probably coming to an end as well, because that kind of brings everything together that we spoke about in those communities, which brings together the larger and the smaller, like the individual, and the more community aspect. Creating like long-term commitment that we spoke about, the safety that we need, sustainability, the belonging to like the community, which needs like a long-term commitment as well. So it's in many ways it's a great experiment for our nervous system to see how we can actually live in communities.
Absolutely. It's a new model that people are working with. And it feels, just as you're telling me, describing it to me, I notice that my nervous system feels so relaxed. Something in my body says, yes, it just feels right. So best of luck.
Thank you.
I think it's so exciting, inspiring. And like you said, there's many lessons that can be pulled from it that we can apply in different areas of our life. Okay, maybe we can't join an intentional community right now, but what is it that I can find in my community where I live? What can I find that interests me, that gives me a sense of connection to other people, that gives me a sense of belonging, that gives me a sense of being connected to something bigger than myself?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Great. Is there anything that you still want to say that we haven't touched upon and you think like it's important to say?
For some reason, the word compassion keeps coming to me as we're talking. And I think the importance, part of resilience, part of nervous system healing is holding compassion for ourselves in these very challenging times, and holding compassion and for others as well in these really challenging times. It's so easy for us right now to get polarized and divided, and to try to find some sort of certainty or security in the idea of who's right or who's wrong, or this needs to be this way or it needs to be this way. And compassion allows us to hold with some heartful energy all of it, to recognize the suffering that's in all of it, to recognize the good intention that's in all of it, to recognize that humans are infallible creatures, that we make mistakes, we stumble, we fall, and this includes ourselves. We're allowed to make mistakes and stumble and fall, and we get to keep standing up and moving forward and trying again and trying again and trying again. So as we're talking about what are the societal and cultural influences on resilience, and how this affects us in our daily living, knowing that even if we don't have right now what we want, and we've tried things in the past that haven't worked, to have the compassion for ourselves and others, to be willing to try again, to try different ways, to hold ourselves without judgment, and to know that there are other people out there as well that want the same things that we want, that we're not alone in this.
Yeah, and that also comes probably with not being judgmental to whatever is being created, like also the capitalist system and the company structures that we spoke about before. And it probably all came to its existence based on good intentions. And then it appeared to have side effects that we may not desire, but at the start there weren't bad intentions. There was like, okay, maybe this is better, and things worked out, and we kind of let it grow. And so it's also about being compassionate to whatever we created, despite the side effects.
It doesn't mean we stop working for change and making things better. Just as you are with your community.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's thank you, Prema. That was really interesting. And it also because one of the things with my podcast is that I try to bring those two worlds together. And I think we succeeded. And it also shown how difficult it actually is. And yeah, but I think there was some really interesting perspectives on what we need as humans, and how we live, and what that does to us, and to our nervous system, like how we are hardwired, which always gives our primary reactions to whatever is going on. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really enjoyed our talk. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Great that you listened to this episode of the Embodiment Talks. Please let me know your thoughts about this episode or the insights that you gained. Email me to the address in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with me, or if you have a question or topic that you want to know more about, don't hesitate to send me an email as well. Do you want to be kept up to date? Like this podcast in your favorite podcast app. You can help me by giving a thumbs up or leaving a comment so that this podcast will reach more people. You can find more information about my work on my website www.embodimentlab.nl or my YouTube channel Embodiment Lab. Thanks for listening, and meet you at the next episode.